It is 10 o'clock. It is the 21st day of January 2021. We've made it this far. Let's see if we can keep going. We are at 300 subs. The goal is 500 subs. What crazy thing will I do today to celebrate 300 subs? I'm not sure yet. But thank you very much for sticking with me. 300 subs. So it's time for today's GM tips. And according to the comptometer, today we are talking about the idea of Railroad versus Sandbox. Now let's just get this out there. Both styles of game can work, and both styles of game cannot work. They can either be incredible successes or horrible failures, depending upon, of course, the game master and the group. If the group is committed to doing a sandboxy, hex crawl, West March style game, it'll work. If they're not, if you get a bunch of people going like, I don't know what to do. What are we supposed to do, DM? Then yeah, same with the other one. Railroads will work if that's what the group is interested in, and it's a good railroad. Otherwise, it won't. So, some examples of both. Obviously, the term railroad comes from it's on a track, and there's very little you can do to deviate the adventure from a track. 99% of most published materials for any game is a railroad game. Modules, whatever. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. There's very few options. You know, the adventure is sort of written to push you towards a very preconceived, pre-established result. You go in the dungeon, you fight some monsters, you fight the thingy, you get the thingy, you return the thingy to the king betrays you, then you have to fight the king, adventure over. You know, that's a good, well-written railroad will work because while it still follows a track, it does have give and take room so that, you know, if they do something a little, you know, like, oh, it's written that, okay, well, we expected that this option might happen, so we're going to address this in the, you know, the other things that can happen section. You know, well-written modules like Storm King's Thunder, Ravenloft, in the 5e genre, address the fact that, you know, even though this is a railroad, sometimes the player characters and sometimes things will happen that allow you to deviate a little. As long as you get to the end in some way, we can deviate a little from the track. We know what's going to happen. Doesn't necessarily have to happen in the order we wrote it. Maybe they go to room 7 before they go to room 4 and completely miss the clue in room 4. Okay, well, here's some options for how to deal with that. We know it's going to deviate a little because that's life. So we you know, so a well-written railroad adventure will address that. Badly written railroad adventures will be like, no, you have to do the adventure has to go exactly where the same we say it is. Nothing the player characters do will change the outcome. A perfect example would be the infamous Time of Troubles module series from TSR Wizards of the Coast. You know, the gods fall, midnight, and Cyric become the new gods, adventure path. Nothing the player characters did in those 3 modules changed the outcome. I mean, you could frickin' stab Mistra Midnight through the heart with a spear, cut off her head, burn her body. She will still end up where she's supposed to be to become the goddess of magic. It just doesn't matter what you do. So that is a badly written example of a railroad adventure. But most 5e and most current modules for any game are well written. I mean, the adventure paths from Pathfinder are probably one of the best written railroads because they address all the possible things that player characters could do. So that's a railroad. Now, on the other hand, we have the Sandbox. And you'll hear lots of words like hex crawl, Sandbox, West March. So basically, again, here the term is based upon playing in a sandbox. And there is infinite opportunities to do any type of imaginative play in a sandbox. Give a kid a sandbox, a couple blocks. It may be a car or a doll or an action figure. The infinite possibilities of that universe are open. So the sandbox basically says, go wherever you want to go, player characters. Explore whatever hexes you want to get. Wander around the West March. I'm going to throw out a couple, you know, things, you know, that you've heard about that you could go explore. But also, you know, whatever direction you go, I've got random tables, or I'm going to listen to your suggestions and build the adventure based upon where you go, what it sounds like you're interested in. And if you're just wandering around, I got random tables. So, hex crawl sandboxes can work. Tomb of Annihilation is basically a sandbox hex crawl. Isle of Dread is a sandbox hex crawl. Of course, the infamous, often heard, spoken of Westmarch campaigns are sandboxes where there's stuff out there that you hear about. So you could go to them. But you could also mention something and everybody's like, oh, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's go to that. And then the DM's like, okay, you're going to the Tomb of the Lich Guy. But I don't have a Tomb of the Lich Guy. I don't know where you got that there was a Tomb of the Lich Guy. But I got random tables. So, sure. And again, a well-written sandbox, a well-written hex crawl, a well-written Westmarch campaign can work because it addresses every possible deviation and it gives the DM and the players enough abilities that if they go in some random direction that you're completely unprepared for because you've opened this sandbox to them and they decide to do something like, let's build a castle, and you're like, I don't have rules for that. I didn't expect that. Then a well-written game will address that. A poorly written one will just be like, well, I don't know. You got then a bunch of adventurers and player characters sitting around expecting the world to tell them what to do. And you're like, that's totally not what this game's about. And they're like, well, what are we supposed to do now? I don't know. Let's go shopping. Let's, kill some villagers. And you're like, I'm bored. Nothing's happened to us. Because they expect you to tell them what to do. They expect the world to tell them what to do because that's the style of adventuring they're used to. Video games, whatever. Both can work if well written with a good group and a good game master. Both can fail miserably. I have been in plenty of railroad games that have worked perfectly fine and a couple railroad campaigns that were total disasters. I've also been in a couple Westmarchy sandbox style games, and I've run a couple sandboxy Westmarchy style games. Usually they don't work because, again, you eventually get to that point where the players are like, what are we supposed to do? And you're like, I've just given you like 30 ideas to go explore. And they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? I don't know which one we're supposed to do first. It's like, well, the whole point of the sandbox is you can do whichever one you want. But they don't understand that. So most of my personal experiences with this sandbox hex crawl Westmarch style game is that they haven't worked. But again, I know they can work. So with the right group who are very proactive and very much, oh, let's go there. It sounds cool. Oh, let's wander around and explore. It sounds cool. Then yes, it will work. I think the best for most of us, though, is a happy medium. Somewhere between sandbox and railroad, where you have your adventure idea, but you also are open to the fact that they might deviate from the adventure idea. And we call this sort of the grandmother's house phenomenon, where, or the table flip phenomenon, where you've established all these things, but somewhere along the way in one of the player characters' backgrounds, it's, I have my grandma in this town. And this is based upon an actual story. And all the player characters decide, let's go to grandmother's house. And no matter what the DM did in this story, and I don't know if it's true or not, it's just what I read, he could not deviate them from going to grandma's house. And the more this DM tried to get them to get back on track of the adventure, the more they resisted because they felt the DM was trying to control them and trying to go against their ideas. And eventually it became very hostile and it ended up with a table flip because they wanted to go. They were just suddenly became so zeroed in on going to grandma's house that nothing the DM did could deviate them from the path. So this is how that idea could go wrong. Now, how that idea can go right is, okay, you need them to get the MacGuffin. We've talked about the MacGuffin a lot, and we'll talk about it again. The MacGuffin is located in the Black Temple. They don't want to go to the Black Temple. They want to go to grandmother's house. Why? I don't know. Because sometimes player characters hear things, and they just get focused on it, And the more you try and get them to not focus on it, the more they want to do it. It's just human nature. So, you need them to get the MacGuffin. The MacGuffin is in the Black Tower. They're not going to the Black Tower. They're going to grandmother's house. The railroad DM is so set on that this is here that he becomes antagonistic to the player characters because they're going over there. But the semi-railroad, semi-sandbox DM who just knows, okay, they just have to get the MacGuffin. But does it have to be at the Black Tower? No. I can move the MacGuffin from the Black Tower over to grandmother's house or somewhere along the way to grandmother's house. Or I can use grandma as a plot hook to get them to get the MacGuffin, which could still be in the Black Tower, or I could have moved somewhere else. Because all that matters for my railroad to continue is that they get this, my MacGuffin. This MacGuffin can be anywhere along the path the adventurers have chosen to follow. If they deviate from the adventure that is written, they have to go to the Black Tower. Fuck the Black Tower. I could take everything in the Black Tower and move it to someplace else and just rewrite it and reskin it to be a completely different setting, because all I really need to do to move my railroad along is get this into the player character's hands to move them to the next stop on the adventure. But I've sandboxed the adventure enough that if they choose to not follow the path of the railroad and go someplace else, I can still move my adventure along to the next stop of the railroad because I have the ability as the GM to move this, my MacGuffin, to wherever I want. They're going to grandma's house? Great. It's now in grandmother's house or somewhere along the way to grandmother's house. Or grandma will now become the plot hook that I use to get them to go get my MacGuffin so we can move the railroad to its next stop. That is, I think, the best way you can address the single-mindedness ideas behind a railroad adventure and the open, do-whatever-you-want mindedness of the sandbox. You combine them both, you find a happy middle between railroad and sandbox. We know that there are certain things that have to happen to move the adventure along because that's the way it's written. And I'm giving myself enough DM advocacy that, yes, I want the adventure to happen. But it doesn't have to happen in the order it's written. As long as they get from point A to point B, whatever happens in the middle of between point A and point B, I, as the game master, can change around to reflect the choices the player characters are making. They're not going where I want them to go. I don't get mad. I don't get upset. I don't fight with them. I simply move what it is I need them to get to where they are going. And that, I think, is the happy medium between Sandbox and Railroad. Hopefully I have explained in somewhat what a sandboxy West March game is. I will leave a link to an individual who explains it much better than I do up above. Hopefully this helps you DMs deal with adventure design, and hopefully you can be open-minded enough to not get locked in and not get hostile and not have a table flipping scenario, because I've seen far too many where you simply just go, okay, I'm just going to move it because it's where your guy's going. Please subscribe to the vlog if you haven't yet. Help me hit 500 subs by August 4th, and we will do something insane. We're still going to do something insane because we hit 300, but I'm not sure what. I will talk to you later. We're off on the road to grandmother's house.